Please join me in giving Floyd Bledsoe and Richard Ney a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess the best place to start, because I assume most of you guys either have read or seen my story in the news. But one of the things I want to reiterate or touch on is the beginning, because that's usually the best place to start. But for me, my favorite place to start is on December 8th, when I walked out of the courthouse. But also, for those of you guys that don't know, I'll give you a brief overall cap of what happened. On November 5th of 1999, a 14-year-old girl went missing. She was living, it was my wife's sister. She was living with me and my wife and my two young boys, Cody and Christian. She was going to school in the Oskaloosa School District. The facts that we know for certain is she got off the school bus at 4:20, and that was the last time anybody had seen her. Approximately 10 o'clock, my mother-in-law called me and wanted to know if I had seen Camille, and I said no. And she asked if she could go check the house, and I said sure. And she went and checked it, no sign. A family friend, Robin Myers, stopped by the house between 4:50 and 5 o'clock. Camille was not there. For the next 3 days, we searched. We passed out flyers. We talked to media. We talked to law enforcement for 3 solid days, almost around the clock. The first night, we searched and searched all night. The next day, after the 48 hours had elapsed, we were starting to become exhausted, mentally and physically. But we still searched. We searched and searched and searched, to no avail. Then, on the early mornings of Sunday night, a man went to the police department, went to turn himself in, but before he did that, he made 4 phone calls. 2 of them, I believe, were to his parents, and 2 of them was to a kind of like an associate pastor type of deal, in which he says that he knows where she is. He wished he hadn't done it, but he had. He wished he could turn back the hands of time, but he couldn't. What he's done, and he's going to turn himself in. That's what he left 2 different times on the pastor's voicemail, or the answer machine at that time. He said his parents were pretty disappointed in him, and he asked for them to help his parents through it. Who was this man? Well, obviously, as you guys know, this man was my brother. He, with my parents and his attorney, took law enforcement to where he had placed the body, to the exact location, everything. Now, from that point on, the facts we don't really know. All we know is there's a bunch of smoke between that time and November 24th. Why do I say there's a bunch of smoke? Because law enforcement never once recorded anything. Never once. And this was for a first-degree murder. That should be totally unacceptable. Despite that, numerous law enforcement people said, yeah, I heard him confess to it. No, never once did any of them record it. That is a problem, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So, on November 12th, or thereabouts, November 11th or 12th, how many of you guys would ever have walked in or sat in on a jury trial? How many people have ever sat in on a jury trial? Okay? How many of you guys would have ever believed somebody who confessed to it, sat in jail for 7 days, and then said, hey, wait, I didn't do it. It was my brother. Anybody here believe that? Would anybody sit here and believe that there's any reason ever to take a rap for a murder? Exactly. There's not. But unfortunately, 12 jurors did, which we'll talk about them here in a minute also. On November 12th, I was arraigned or arrested, not allowed to, actually, technically I was not arrested. They just said I wasn't allowed to leave. They wouldn't let me go out and use the public restroom. I had to use it in a locked cell, but I was not arrested. Even though they pat searched me and escorted me everywhere, they said, well, we didn't technically arrest him because of the 72-hour deal. They didn't want to say I was arrested. In fact, they told my wife at one point in time, to which she will still admit to this day, which she admitted in trial, they said, we don't know where he went. He got in a vehicle and left. This is the law enforcement saying this, not just some Joe Schmo off the street. This is law enforcement. To which she says, wait a minute. He's got a wake, he's got a funeral. He's not going to just disappear. His car's out front, the window's down. Well, we don't know. And they dismissed her just like that. For 3 days, they told her that. Then, finally, by a miscalculation of a jailer, I was able to use the phone and was able to make a phone call. And at that point in time, they arraigned me because the gig was up and charged me with first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated indecent liberties. My trial lasted 6 days. From the day one of my interviews, they recorded everything. But the person that confessed to it, took them where the body was, told them how everything, they didn't even record anything until the earliest recording of him that we have currently is November 25th. To which parts of that is still pretty suspect, we'll put it that way. Well, in late April of 2000, I went to jury trial. My attorney, John Kurth, out of Atchison County, said, this will be a cakewalk. Anybody ever done a cakewalk? You know, what happens? How do you know you get ruled out? You don't get to sit down, right? You're the one left standing, right? That's the problem with an attorney who says anything's a cakewalk. Somebody's going to be left standing up because they keep taking away a chair. Well, after my conviction, I was sentenced to life in prison plus 14 years. I was sent to this nice, lovely castle over in Hutchinson, Kansas, at the ripe age of 23, with 2 children. One was 2 and one was 9 months. The last time I saw my children prior to my release was November 12th at 1:30 in the afternoon. That day and time is always etched in my mind because of the very fact certain individuals used the 2 things, the 2 people most dear to me, against me. They took them and used them as a weapon. Then, on December 8th of 2015 at 3:35 in the afternoon, 3:45, I walked out of Jefferson County Courthouse, a free man. 16 years. 16 years. How does that happen? Because a jury member said, in essence, well, we don't know which one did it, but we thought we had to make somebody pay, and this was our opportunity to make somebody pay. You know the problem with the jury member who says this is our opportunity to make somebody pay? You become a lynch mob. And the last time I checked, we have laws against lynch mobs. It's not a jury member's duty to make somebody pay. A jury member's duty is to look at the facts and evaluate facts. They agreed that facts were not strong. My trial judge agreed that the facts weren't there. But nobody stood up and said, this isn't right. This isn't right. Nobody stood up for justice. Prior to this meeting, we stood up and we said a pledge of allegiance to the flag for liberty and justice for all. So many times in our lives, we say things and they're just mere words in our mouth. We forget what those words actually mean. We say, well, at least it's not me, or at least it's not somebody in my family. But the problem is what happens when it comes to knocking at your door and you get caught off guard? What happens when it does become one of your family members, or you yourself, God forbid? What happens? Then you become just like me, a biggest advocate of trying to get change to happen so it doesn't happen to somebody else. That's what's the problem with our world, is we always wait until it happens to us, and then we want to get involved, instead of being preventative in the things we do. So, we appealed the decision of the court. We raised it in the Kansas Supreme Court on direct appeal. What the judge said, that he saw no evidence to support the conviction. The Kansas Supreme Court came back and said, well, we realize he said that and he didn't overturn it, but we find no fault with that. This is our court system that we base everything off of. This is our same court system that says, although in the hands of another attorney, this case might have been tried to a different conclusion, in our opinion, May is not good enough. What does it take? While the trial was not perfect, in their opinion, it was fair. All right, let's take a look. All right? How many of you guys think it's fair for a prosecutor to make up a complete fabricated story, unsupported by the facts, and admit it as evidence? Nobody? Oh, wow. How many people would think it's okay that a prosecutor would argue something as truth, even though it's really not? Not one person in this room? Wow. How many people does it take before we decide to do something different? How many people is it going to take, ladies and gentlemen, before we decide, you know what, enough's enough? One life is too many. How many people? During my time in incarceration, I learned a lot of things. I learned the value of family. I learned the value of friendship. And I learned the value of forgiveness. See, forgiveness is not a one-time action. Forgiveness is a day-to-day activity. It's a day-to-day choice. For 16 years, I woke up with the same walls, the same windows, the same bars, the same razor wire, the same people, some of which have committed truthfully some of the vilest crimes ever known. And I was stuck smack dab in the middle of them. I went to a seminar called Inner Healing, in which they taught me what forgiveness is, how it can set people free. Forgiveness truly can set people free. When I heard that, I went and saw my parents the very next day. My goal was to say, look, I forgive you guys for everything. I forgive Tom. I forgive the state. I forgive everybody. Because that was going to set me free. Because people's lives are changed. Everything goes back hunky-dory. The day I walked out there, it was approximately 8 days after my direct appeal. And I was like, yes, this is the one thing that's going to set me free. I walked out of the table, not much unlike these, except not quite as fancy chairs, no tablecloths, just a little cushion on a stool. And I sat down. In my mind, I thought I was the happiest person in the world because this was what I was going to use to get myself free. And as I sat there, my mother looked at me and said, "Why are you so sad?" I took a double look at her and I said, "What?" She goes, "Normally you're so happy." I said, "My direct appeal just got denied. I'm stuck in prison, facing the rest of my life, and I'm supposed to be happy for it?" She goes, "Well, we know that. We read all that in the paper. But normally you're all happy." I said, "You know what? I thought I could do this, but I can't." I stood up and I said, "Don't write me. Don't call me. Don't come visit me. I'll let you know when I'm ready." I walked out of that visiting room mad at God. Mad at him for two reasons. One, he took my opportunity to get somebody to feel and understand my pain. And number two, he took my opportunity that I believe for my freedom. I went back to my cell, tears running down my face. I was so angry, so hurt. I just couldn't understand why God wouldn't let me use it. I went back to that inner healing seminar that day. The officer came and opened the door. At first, I wasn't going to go. I was so angry. And he goes, "I'll just leave the door open." As I sat there thinking, I was like, well, I might as well go. After all, they had food. So I went, and as I sat in the back, I heard the rest of the story of what forgiveness truly is and what it truly does. Forgiveness is not a weapon. Forgiveness does not always change the offender. The forgiveness sets the offended free, which meant that I didn't have to live with the anger, the bitterness, the resentment from what other people did to me. If you can picture unforgiveness, it's just like sitting in a prison cell with all those people that ever harmed you. And you just can't get away from them. When you wake up, you see them. When you go to sleep, you see them. In your dreams, you see them. And forgiveness, well, that's the key that allows you to open the door and walk out and not have to be in that cell with them anymore. Forgiveness is not at all connected with allowing somebody to get off scot-free. Let me reiterate that one more time. Forgiveness does not mean that those that have offended you should not be held accountable for what they did. Forgiveness is about setting you free and to be able to walk in a life unhampered by what others have done. It took me 16 years to understand that. 16 years of waking up every day and saying, you know what? Enough's enough. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be bitter. I've seen a lot of guys in prison, some rightfully so and some not, bitter and angry at everything. And I told myself, I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be a person who's stuck. So I took classes. I took utility maintenance, learned heating and air and refrigeration, plumbing and electrical. I took classes like Freedom Challenge that taught me cognitive thinking skills from a biblical basis. I volunteered for programs like hospice, in which I would go and make friends with people that have got less than 6 months to live. And I would sit there while they passed on from this life to the next. Because one night I was working heating and air, and a lieutenant told me that there was a guy dying. He had nobody, and he was dying alone in a cold cell, in an isolation cell by himself. And I asked him, I said, well, can I go sit with him? He said, nope, we don't have a program, we can't allow it. And I made myself a promise, if they ever offered a program, I would take it. And I did. 6 months later, some of my closest friends went from being in perfect health one day to dying of cancer within a year. And I watched them pass on. It's taught me how, prison has taught me the value of friendship. In the worst of worst places, I found some of my closest friends. Friends that took the place of my family. For those of you guys that don't know, in early November, they discovered that my brother's DNA was on a vaginal swab, that my father's DNA was on the socks, and everything makes sense of why everything went the way it did. We've discovered a lot of facts between December 8th and now. A lot of different things are coming to light. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is what's done in the darkness will be revealed in the light. What's hid shall be uncovered. It was funny when the county attorney, Jason Belleville, called the detectives that prosecuted the case, that testified against me, called them in and said, tell me about the Bledsoe case. They said, oh, he's guilty. He's like, just like that, he's guilty? He's like, yep. And he says, and he threw the DNA report down on the table and said, how do you explain this? To which they just tried to cover, tried to lie. That's the great thing about the truth. No matter how deep you try to bury it, it'll always come to the top. Just like a splinter in your hand. Sooner or later, it's going to fester back up, and you're going to say, ouch, that really hurt coming out. That's what I love about the truth. Some of the other things that we've done since then. I've had the privilege of testifying before the judicial committees in our capital on compensation. Ramon Gonzalez introduced legislation to help compensate wrongfully convicted people. For those of you guys that don't know, Ramon Gonzalez was one of the new special investigators assigned to my case. And he himself testified in my December 8th hearing. He goes, I went in expecting to find all this overwhelming evidence. And he goes, all I found was overwhelming evidence that he did not do it and a huge mistake had been made. Kirk Vernon. They've all sat him down, asked the same detectives, Troy Frost, said, how did you guys come up with this? And Troy told him, said, well, I just don't know. He goes, Whatever we were thinking then just for some reason made sense. And they're like, didn't you guys ever look at anything? Our judicial system, folks, for those of you guys that live in a glass house, I'm sorry, it's broken. Our judicial system is broken. It's not beyond all repair. Please understand me. It can be repaired. But it takes diligence on every one of our parts. For those of you guys that are attorneys, it takes diligence on your part. For those of you guys that are just common people or advocates, it takes diligence on your part to get the word out. There's a lot of people out in this city that don't even have a clue about our judicial system. I was one of them. Prior to 1999, I thought our judicial system worked. Ed Benton said, I guess we just got it wrong. The jury made a mistake. Huh. If I go and take one of you guys and stick you someplace for 16 years, that's called kidnapping. But in Kansas, it's called a mistake because it's done by a public official. That's the problem with our judicial system. We want to excuse the wrongs because of who did them. We lock people up all the time for kidnapping. What would have happened, ladies and gentlemen, if I would have died in prison? What would have happened? The prosecutor, Jim Vanderbilt, told one reporter, and I didn't know this until here recently, he goes, I don't know which one we did it, which one of the two brothers did it, but at least I got one. To which Brooke Lexington, the KSNT reporter out of Topeka, asked the old cameraman, said, why didn't that make you wonder? And he goes, I just went with the flow. He goes, he just said it so offhandedly. That's the problem with our system. I would love to tell you that, hey, that was 16 years ago and this stuff don't happen today. But it does. I got a friend whose name's John Calvin. His co-defendant said John was not even involved, and I believe said he wasn't even there when the whole thing happened. The district court ruled in John's favor, and he's still sitting in prison. And his ruling came out way before mine, almost a year before mine. And he's still in Lansing prison today because the state keeps appealing. We have some major problems with our system. Number one, and I don't mean to slam anybody, but anytime you limit appeals, you limit the right to wrong, to right and wrong. Okay? Why are there so many appeals? How many of you guys think that a defendant should only have a few appeals? Be honest. One person? Two people? Guess how many appeals it took before I finally got free? Somebody take a wild guess. 10? 10? How many? 23? It took 10. 10 appeals before I finally got my freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, if you limit appeals, you limit justice. You limit appeals, you'll limit justice. The problem with the 60-1507, which is ineffective assistance of counsel claim, is the 1-year statute of limitation. Anybody other than a lawyer ever try to fill one of those out? In prison, after your direct appeal, you have to fill one out. I'm sorry, I went from milking cows to having to be an attorney? Come on. In a matter of 18 months? Most attorneys, you guys go to school for what, 8 years? Something like that? Long time before you're able to even try cases? But yet I have to figure out all that mumbo jumbo and figure out what is a right claim, what's a wrong claim, what cases to cite, what cases not to cite, what arguments to bring up, and do so in a proper manner. Otherwise, the court won't accept it. They'll say, "Oh, this is frivolous," and throw it out. But thankfully, a friend, Tom Cooley, we were talking over lunch one day, and he brought me Richard Nay's card and said, "If 10% of what you told me is true, this man can help you." One thing I'm very thankful for is all my attorneys that have ever been, and interns that have been involved in my case. Because each one, once they came to the end of their road, passed on the baton to the next person and always made sure there was somebody else there, or they just kept going with it. Our system is broken, folks. We need to overhaul our system. Mass incarceration is not the answer. Mass incarceration is not the answer. Just locking people up is not solving issues. Our wonderful state is going broke for mass incarceration. So what do? We cut the budgets of those same people that we're supposed to be reforming. Anybody ever want to know what it's like to sit in prison? Take a tour. And then ask to sit in there for a week. It's not a fun place. Sit in there where some days you may get toilet paper, some days you may not. Sit in there where you have to wait, you only get mail 5 days a week, but it's always 3 days behind. Sit in there where you can only make a certain amount of phone calls. Sit in there where you can't, a lot of times, hold your children. Sit in there where people always look at you with suspicion. Where you can see the outside world, just like looking through that window back there, but just never being able to touch it. Prison in Kansas, while it's not always a violent place, but it can turn very violent. The worst part of Kansas prison is the mental abuse. Sit in a place where every time you go to a visit, you get stripped out. Completely naked. Where an officer can come and say, "You need to strip." Or they shake down your room. Sit in a place where you have no control over anything. You have no rights over anything. But yet they expect you to do all this other stuff. That's our life. That was my life for 16 years. And it's by the grace of God that I'm here today. I cannot say that enough. Somebody asked me earlier, was I a Christian before I went into prison? Yes. And it's because of my faith and because of the things I learned while I was a youth that carried me through my prison time. That taught me the value of Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the thoughts I think towards you," declares the Lord, "thoughts to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you that expected end." There was times where I doubted whether that expected end would come. There was times where, even just weeks before my release, I'm like, "God, I just don't understand this. Why? Why?" It was the hardest time And it's my attorneys that stood beside me that became more than just an attorney-client. They became my family. They took care of me up after my release. They didn't just say, okay, you're free, now go. That's what the state of Kansas did. I paid almost $12,000 in restitution for a crime I did not do, to which I'm still trying to get that money back. To which, even after my release, with my last paycheck, they still kept part of it. And said, oh yeah, we still got to get our cut. Even though they know I was innocent. They didn't say, oh here, we'll just stop this now. Nope, we still need our cut. Our system is broken, folks. And it's up to all of us in this room to change it, to make changes. Next year, it's my hopes that we'll bring back the Mandatory Recording Act, in which some of you guys may know about it, some of you guys may not. Why is it so important? It's a very simple law that says that you have to record, make it mandatory that you record the top 4 felonies in the state of Kansas. Very simple. To which certain officials, certain organizations, the prosecutor offices, or the League of Prosecutors and the League of Sheriffs said, oh, no, we don't want it mandatory. Let's make it voluntary. Problem with voluntary is 16 years of wrongful incarceration. They thought it was voluntary. We'll choose when we record it. We'll choose when not to. And they tried to use the excuse, well, it's the jury instruction that we worry about. One thing I learned in my incarceration, and I'll end with this. People will lie, but cameras, they don't lie. To which a prosecutor, honest, you guys can go back and look, to which a prosecutor at that hearing on the Mandatory Recording Act said, well, it's not always that easy. Yeah, it is. The camera just shows what's there. The recording only records what's there. I had a detective that said that I said that I went to the trailer. And when we went back and reviewed the camera, guess what? Anybody want to guess what wasn't there? But yet cameras won't always tell the truth. Detectives always do. Come on, folks. I ask you, I plead with you, I beg you, for those of you guys that are elected officials, going back to the Capitol, change it. Make it mandatory. Don't buy the smoke. Don't buy into the smoke, folks. Change things. Prosecutors should not have immunity. I'm sorry. Why is it if I lie, I'm held accountable, but a prosecutor can, and I ask your forgiveness, I was going to put that on there. Judge Rogers says about my prosecutor, said, this is a complete fabricated story, unsupported by the facts. And I find this very troubling. The same Kansas Supreme Court, and if you're on the Kansas Supreme Court, I apologize, or if you have friends there, said, while these things are troubling, we don't think. That's the problem. Nobody ever took time to think and say, this is wrong. Let's stand up for justice. Jason Belleville, at the close of our hearing on December 8th, told the judge, Judge, this evidence demands that you throw out this verdict. I ask you guys, stand up for justice. Stand up for justice for all. Stand up for justice, even for the guilty people, to ensure that they have fair trials. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the system used your two people against you, which you didn't say who they were and how they used them.
The two people that they used against me was Cody and Christian, my 2-year-old son and my 9-month-old son. They tried to say that I was blackmailing my brother to take the crime so that I could spend time with them.
Some prominent people like Charles Koch and Rand Paul, who ran for president, have recommended that people that have been convicted of drug offenses, that they not serve long sentences or no sentence and be rehabilitated. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do, fully. One of my friends, Benny Birdie, he is convicted of 2 drug offenses. He's serving 40 years for drug offenses, and he's 52. Think about it. Simple drug offenses. Look how many, have you guys ever walked down the street and really seen how many people is out there doing drugs? You know? But guess what? You know the saddest part is, the only ones that do a long time in prison are people that can't afford good attorneys. You ever ask yourself, why is that? Equal protection. Rehabilitation can happen if we just allow them.
Let me first qualify my question with, many of you all know I'm a retired warden from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And I provide training to wardens not only in the state of Kansas, but at the American Correctional Association for wardens from all over the country. If you had the opportunity to share with me what you think they need to know to run the prisons the best they can, to help the people that are trying to help themselves, what would your advice be?
That's a good question. I would say don't quit cutting the programs and dumping money into increased security measures and all of that. You know, the programs I took 16 years ago are no longer offered in prison. The trades, they're no longer, very few of them are offered anymore. Now if they're there, they're offered through volunteers. And you can't even get certified in half of them. Because when you get out, they're like, this ain't really any good, you know, and you start back down at the bottom. If you want to effectively change people, give them something to change for. Give them something to change for.
You know, when we look back and try to answer the WWW questions, what went wrong, Judge Nafsinger erred when he didn't give you direct verdict. Judge Rogers on your 1507 granted, and the 10th Circuit Court got it wrong. And then the Kansas Supreme gets it wrong because they use the sufficiency of evidence standard. And if we're ever going to change it, and this might be something the legal counsel might know more about, we have to change that standard, because the standard is the court looks at all the evidence in light most beneficial to the prosecution, when it should look at all the evidence in a neutral stance. You think we could ever get that changed? You think we could ever formulate that?
Well, and you're right. This wasn't just one failure. I mean, this was multiple failures. The Kansas Supreme Court saw this case twice and got it wrong twice, both on the direct appeal and the 1507 appeal. What Floyd pointed out was Justice Breyer's statement, well, another lawyer might have gotten acquittal. Almost any lawyer might have gotten an acquittal. But that's not what we look at. And that's the standard. That standard is not just in the light most favorable to the prosecution. At a post-conviction, what we have to look at is to convince a court that the result would have been different. And what is that besides a subjective statement by judges? Judge Rogers was the only hero of the judiciary in this. He said that this was a travesty, and the 10th Circuit reversed him. So we had the Supreme Court twice, the 10th Circuit once, deciding this case wrong. When we finished argument on the 1507 appeal to the Supreme Court, the Solicitor General came to me and said, "Are you going to retry this when they reverse?" We were all convinced that this had been such a travesty. Not just what had been put at the trial, that Tommy had confessed multiple times, that it was his gun who committed the murder, but he couldn't explain how Floyd got it somehow. And all those problems. Then at the 1507, we introduced the lawyer's ineffectiveness, but also new evidence that the state had lied about Tommy passing or being inconclusive on a polygraph test. He'd failed it miserably. And witness after witness that the defense did not investigate, did not put on, the evidence that was there that Floyd was innocent. That's what the Supreme Court had the second time. And they said, and you saw the quote, well, another lawyer might have won, but, whatever. What is astounding to me, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you think about this case, it's almost laughable, but Floyd would still be sitting in prison if the DNA had not been found. And we were told originally, 10 years ago, when I got involved in the case, there was no comparable DNA. The state said there was no DNA to be compared. We tried other avenues for DNA, but they didn't have the vaginal swab. Well, suddenly, 10 years later, 9 years later, they did. Why does it take that to get this reversed? And think about all the people in Kansas prisons and prisons around the nation who don't have DNA to free them, that are absolutely as innocent as Floyd, have had trials as marred with problems as Floyd's was. But no DNA, no reversal.
Next question back here. I'll try to get to as many more as I can.
How was your family supported while you were in there on wrongful conviction?
My aunt and uncle stood by me the whole 16 years. They talked with Richard numerous times and with my other attorneys. But basically, that was it. A lot of my family now are the guys still in prison. Because those are the same guys that cried when I left prison. They were very happy for me. Pretty strange, huh? People that we as a society deem as unfit to function in regular society, they were some of the most happiest people when I got the reversal.
Next question over here.
Floyd, how many people that you knew in prison do you think were innocent of their crimes? And for Richard May, what has happened to the people now that we know made serious mistakes in this case? What punishment has happened? What fines have been levied? What has happened to those that have done so wrong to this gentleman?
I know of at least 3 people that I believe are innocent. 90% of the guys that you meet, if they're truly innocent, they're not going to tell you. Because to them, you're just another person. It doesn't matter. A reporter asked me one time, said, "Why didn't you just go tell somebody?" I'm like, who are you going to tell that matters? The jailers, the same people that are assigned to keep you there? They're going to say, yeah, okay, go back to your room. It's not like I could go up to Governor Brownback's office and say, "Hey, Sammy, how you doing? Let me talk to you for a couple minutes." No, it don't work like that. So you learn, and it's through friendship.
Well, I think there are a number of innocent people in prison. I have a case pending right now where an individual was convicted of robbery and got a 25-year sentence. He's serving that sentence. He's just basically started that sentence because he had a previous federal sentence. We struggled for years, I'm saying years, to get a chance to test the DNA in the case. We finally were able to do that. It was hair. So we did mitochondrial DNA. It exonerated him as being the robber. But you know what the argument the state is making now? Well, the DNA statute only applies to people who are convicted of murder or rape. So you know what? Guy who's in prison serving 25 years, just starting his 25-year sentence, should sit there because it's not one of those crimes the legislature says you can be exonerated for. We're fighting, that appeal is pending. We'll have oral argument later this year. I mean, that's the system we still have going here. And one that you'd asked about what happened to people. Floyd, I think, is obviously probably going to pursue his civil remedies here. But one thing I want to put a pitch in for, if Floyd had been convicted and imprisoned in the state of Texas, we all know what we think about the Texas judicial system, right? He would have received $80,000 a year for the time he was wrongfully imprisoned. You know what Kansas gives him? Nothing. Nothing. That is also something, along with the Recording Act that Floyd's talking about, that should be corrected in this state.
And the other thing that Texas does is give free education to those who've been wrongfully incarcerated.
I'm very honored to have the last question for both of you gentlemen. In this county and also in the city, especially in the last several years, there has been a push by advocates to hold officers accountable for what the badge on the left side of the uniform means. And it's not to cover their heart. It's the integrity and the honor and the truthfulness that they bring in the testimony. What do you plan to do to hold the detectives accountable under what happened in Wichita with the former chief of police being labeled as having Brady illegal material, as being a liar, 30 officers in this city being on the list of being untruthful or having things in their past, of being deceptive, racial, or biased? How come the detectives that are still working for the agency still are wearing badges?
That's a very good question, and and that's the thing. Go to your chief of police. Go to your county sheriff and say, I voted for you, so therefore you work for me. Why is this still going on?
And I think I would add, Brady, which is the Brady requirement is that evidence favorable to a defendant always be provided. And that's what you're talking about, that information about the officer should be provided. And some of the huge issues in Floyd's case was it was withheld. We still have prosecutors, and the prosecutor in this case was horrendous, but prosecutors and police agencies withholding evidence that could be favorable to an accused. And that has got to stop. That is the most egregious violation of rights that I can imagine, and there should be prosecutions for withholding that evidence. There's just no excuse for it.
And remember, people want you to believe that a video is going to maybe cast, the police officers in a bad light. If you don't do anything wrong, then you don't have nothing to hide. Think about that. And that's the argument that the prosecution office put. Oh, that'll put our officers in a bad light. No, because that'll say, oh, Officer Joe Smith, excellent officer, look what he did. Officer Steve, excellent officer, look what he did. Officer John, why did you do that? Oh, wait a minute. It can be a training tool for other officers. It doesn't have to paint them in a bad light. The only people that it's going to paint in a bad light are the ones doing wrong because they don't have no place to hide. Our system is broken. We need to change. We have to change. As long as we adhere to this system, then we got problems. That's why we need to abolish a lot of things. We need to change a lot of things. We need to reevaluate what we agree and disagree about. How much is one life worth? Because guess what? I know some of you guys are for the death penalty. But if you execute one innocent person, what kind of appeal is that to get back from? If you go out to the street and execute somebody, you're held for murder. Think about it. Thank you.